Happy Friday. So we are in the last lesson of the week on normal distribution review, one of my favorites actually. And I'm actually gonna have to use my document camera in a minute to show you some of the calculation part of it. But quick reminder on normal distributions. Normal distributions have this bell shape right here. I actually put on here that whole idea that you have about 99.7 or about 100% of your values are within 3 standard deviations of your mean. So you have that mean right in the middle. And it looks like, if I were to look at this right here, my mean is at 150 for this. And 1 standard deviation, it looks like I'm adding 30. So I have a mean of 150 and a standard deviation of 30. I would subtract 30 to go 1 standard deviation in that direction. Subtract another 30 until I get that 3 standard deviations in either direction. So that's what we're looking at. When we look at these, they're visually, you have your mean and then 3 standard deviations away in either one, and all of your values should essentially be within those 3 standard deviations. So that's just kind of the setup. So getting into what you can do with these is you can calculate, if you know a mean and standard deviation, you can calculate where your relative score is. So for example, if I scored 180 on an SAT and these right here were the values, then I could take that 180 and subtract, find my distance from the mean, okay, 180 minus the mean of 150. I am 30 away in the positive direction, it's a positive 30. I'm 30 away from the mean. But then what we do is we divide by our standard deviation. When we do that, it tells us exactly how many standard deviations away I am. When I take 30 and I divide by 30, which is a standard deviation, I get 1. If I scored a 180, I am 1 standard deviation away on that direction. We can use a z-table to talk about, actually I'll do that right now. If I'm 1 standard deviation away, I can use a z-table, which you guys can find back actually in the folder. I put a z-table, a link to a z-table. So if you go to this z-table right here, nothing will show up here, but if you click on z-table, then it will take you to the website that has the z-table. So looking at the z-table, I scored a 1 standard deviation away, right? 1 standard deviation higher. So I look for 1.0, and there it is, 1.0. Let's say I scored 1.05, right? I would go 1.0, and if you remember, we use this as our second decimal, okay? 1.05, 1.0, and then I'd go over here to 5. But I didn't, I scored 1.0. I scored in the, and I only do the, I round to the nearest 2 here. In the 0.84, I'm in the 84th percentile. I scored as well as, so remember it's shaded to the left, so I scored as well as 84% of people if I'm 1 standard deviation away. Okay, so that gives you some context for what we're doing there. Let me go back to the lesson again so that we can see it one more time. We are going to have problems where we essentially find out our z-scores, how far away is a certain value. So on this first one, I'm gonna use this. For the first one, it says, what % of people scored above a 185? So I'm gonna switch over to my document camera, show you this one example, and then we'll be done. Let me go to my settings and switch over. Okay, so on here, the first thing I would do always for that, if they were asking for me to calculate a z-score, I would draw a table, and you'll see me do this again in our practice for tonight if you watch the video. So I have my mean right here is at 150, and they're asking what % of people scored above a 185? Well, 185 is up here. I know that much. 185 is up here. And they want to know what % of people scored above it. That's shaded to the right. I always make sure I shade, because if you don't shade properly, you're not going to get it right. Okay, so shading to the right because they want to know above. Okay, so that's my first step, drawing that beautiful normal distribution. And now I'm going to calculate the z-score. So my z is equal to the value that I'm at, or in this one that I care about, 185, minus the mean. The distance from the mean is essentially what that is. This is going to be 35 above the mean, right? Over the standard deviation, so I can figure out the z-score, like how many standard deviations away is it? So I have 185 minus 150. That is going to be 35. I take 35 and I divide by 30 and I get I should put that here so you guys can see 1.1, and I'm going to round it to 7. 1.17 is going to be my z-score. Just slightly above 1 standard deviation. I mean, that makes sense. Here's 180. 185 is just slightly above that. Just slightly above that. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to my table. So I'm going to go back to my table. Did I get rid of it? No, I didn't. It's right here. So this right here is the table. I'm going to look for the value of 1.17 on here. I need to go back so I can see 7. Okay, so 1.1 and 7. There it is. 0.8790. I'm going to round that to 0.88. When I have 0.8790, I'm going to round it to 88%. Well, that's always the area to the left, always. If you look at the picture, it makes sure to show you that. Like the areas that they're giving you here are always the area to the left. The problem is, I obviously don't want the area to the left. I want the area to the right. Well, this entire area right here is 1. So if I take 1 and I subtract out that 88%, I'll be left with that piece right there that we want. So whenever you're finding the area to the right, you're going to do 1 minus the area to the left. And that's going to give us our 0.12 or 12% when I say that. 12% score higher than 185. Okay. Good luck with your homework. And make sure you watch the video to make sure you've done yours correctly for the 5 problems that you have. A couple of them you're just looking at z-scores, but then you do have a couple where you're going to go through and have to do the calculations like this.